Welcome to the Redirect Podcast, where we discuss trends and topics in the digital marketing space and how it affects your brand. I'm Adrienne Wallace. My guests today are in-house, Jason Dodge and Derek DeVries. You might have heard of them from Black Truck Media and Marketing. Today, we'll talk about avoiding the algorithm trap, building resilient digital strategies with owned media. Welcome to the podcast, fellas. How's everything going?
It's going well. I'm happy to be here. Yeah, going real well. This is going to be a fun one. I think there's a lot of, there's a lot of opportunity in the social space. There's a lot of people that focus a lot of attention in the social space that maybe should or shouldn't. So, I'm always looking forward to breaking that down a little bit.
Right
So,
on. Well, today we do have, like always, we want to make sure that people leave here with a takeaway or two, or today we have four. So we're going to talk about understanding third-party app dependency, exploring benefits of owned media, and we'll talk about the peso model and Ginny Dietrich probably on this too for a second, just to get people caught up with that. And then actionable tips to integrate owned media into your strategy and some real life examples from our experts here. So we'll go ahead and get started with the dependency dilemma. Can you talk a little bit about our popularity of third-party apps and our dependency, our addiction?
man, I
What's
mean,
going on with that,
yeah,
Jay?
I don't think they're, and I will like say too, full disclosure, I'm not the individual that has the PR and communications background as do you two. I strictly come at it certainly first and foremost from a search perspective, but really, let's just call it a psychologist of the web, right? I'm always fascinated about how people navigate the internet. I have for 25 years been involved in it, and it's a constant moving target. And I think the apps, the third party apps in general, so if you think of social media marketplace, so not just Facebook or anything related to Meta, but look at YouTube, etc., WhatsApp. um yeah, the dependency, the addiction, I don't think we want to get it too deep into the addiction side of it, but the algorithmic changes, I think, are what draw our dependency toward it, as well as the idea that it's big tech, right? If you look at, I believe it's somewhere in the neighborhood of over 50% of the social platforms out there are owned by one conglomerate, which would be Meta. So they have their fingers and their hooks and their ties into everything that we do, right? The joke is it's a what is it? It's an Amazon, Facebook, Google world, and we just live in it, right?
Absolutely. And I think that there's lots to talk about related to apps, information, privacy, et cetera, right? And
Yeah.
today we'll talk kind of like more narrowly about the benefits of having owned media versus maybe a third-party app. So,
Well,
um,
and I think to add to that too,
mhm.
there's all three of us that are on this recording today. If you can kind of, I would say to listeners, if you think back of like maybe your start in digital marketing in the digital world, whatever your journey is, there are brands distinctly, and there's many of us that kind of grew up through the infancy of social media and the brands that launched only on social, zero web presence other than on those platforms, to then maybe see some of that strip away or them having to, really pivot based off of that.
Yeah, that's particularly terrifying. And so owned media is sort of like the antidote to that, right? Or at least having like a more balanced approach to that. Some of these businesses were built entirely on these platforms, and we have a couple examples. Did you want to run through a couple of them, Jason and Derek?
Yeah, for sure. I'll kick it off, and then Derek, I'll let you jump in for sure. But I think the constant here is that many of these brands leverage the social platforms for what they were, right? So as social currency, influencer marketing, certainly some of them were influencers to begin with, or social media personalities, which I think is predating influencers, and then turned into a brand. It was a springboard into something else. So you have things like the brand Gymshark, right? Super popular branded clothing apparel line, started off in the Instagram, YouTube, TikTok world, morphed from there into this phenomenon that is Gymshark. Makeup Geek, which actually was a client of Black Truck's for quite some time until they decided to close up shop. Truthfully, um,
Yeah, one of the OG beauty influencers, really.
huge. Like before,
Mhm.
I am not a makeup person, but before like Sephora really got into it, and is it Glossier? Is that, am
Yes,
I saying that?
you're
Okay.
doing it right.
Thank
Yes,
you.
yes.
Wonderful. Like before they really even blew up, Marlena, who was Makeup Geek, got her start in YouTube fame. So I think those are really great examples of brands that started on these platforms, then morphed into their own product lines and own offerings.
Yeah, Derek, did you want to contribute to that?
Yeah, I think it's something that you see across not just social platforms, but the e-commerce platforms as well. Some brands have, launched on Amazon and were Amazon only, or they were Etsy only, or, some other marketplace only. And they've discovered that they run in, when you're locked into a platform, you are bound by its whims. And most, as anyone who has the ability to charge basically rent can do, and anybody that's renting an apartment or anything, that you're kind of stuck when that's your only option in terms of what you pay for rent. So these platforms have, over the years, now that they've brought an audience in, they're trying to monetize that by uh, increasing the rental costs.
No, I think you absolutely are correct in that. And there's, I mean, the Mr. Beasts of the world, Mark Rober's of the world, my children could probably spout off all kinds of great scientific facts because of of Mark Rober, who, great influencer on the YouTube side, who also launched a product, right? A children's STEM product called Crunch Labs, and is wildly successful with that. I think that's really great too. But there's definitely the risks involved there, and maybe later on I can speak to some examples of the inverse of that too, where people have started. Oh man, I don't want to say offline because it's kind of online or offline, like on other streaming or owned platforms, but yet they didn't own it. So I can speak to that later
Yeah,
too.
let's talk a little bit about the hidden risks of sort of this third party dependency and what has we've seen this happen to brands. We've had this happen with brands we work with. Like,
Yeah.
what are some of the risks and what are we trying to avoid in order to maintain our brand standards?
And it is a moving target, and I think I mentioned that before, is that anybody that works in the digital space, if you're not talking about it this way, certainly with leadership, you should be. This is a constant moving target. These are very reactive industries. If you work in social, certainly if you work in search, right? We don't get to know what the algorithms are. Um, just like we don't get to know the changes that Meta's going to make to Business Manager. You can log in one morning, you log in the next morning, and something is completely different, right? They take our tools away, our fancy audience targeting, things of that nature just completely can poof up and go. So the algorithm changes, which is unpredictable, and it reduces our visibility, right? Attribution, as we know, it's something Derek and I have been working really hard and probably talking a lot about over the last couple of years, it feels, is just attribution in this murky middle. It's difficult to it's difficult to measure the absolute success of all of these different marketing channels when they are owned by somebody else, not
Mhm.
yourself. And quite frankly, anybody out there that tells you that they can measure it successfully is blowing a bunch of smoke.
Yeah. Derek, will you talk a little bit about how vulnerable these brands really are to shutdown of the platform, account bans, like talk about some of the risks involved in kind of going all in or not having a more diversified strategy.
Yeah, I mean, as we've seen, platforms can fail. It used to be a lot more common until we got sort of to a too big to fail model where, there's been so much consolidation, or in some cases stifling of innovation, in that a new platform can't come up unless it's owned by a large conglomerate, or it comes from outside the country, like TikTok. But TikTok's a good example. There have been discussions about shutting it down to be seen as to whether that's going to happen. I tend to think not, but it's certainly within the realm of possibility in an era that is more unpredictable than previous eras have been. Then there's just like you can run afoul of moderation and content and have your account banned. There can be technical glitches. Just ask anybody that's lost an account. I believe Dr. Wallace, your original Instagram
Oof.
account disappeared with
It did.
no reason
Oh
why,
my gosh.
no warning, and your account was just gone. And unless you're spending massive amounts of money with Meta, you just can't get support, either personal like user support or business support, unless you're a massive advertiser and have access to that sort of tier one support, and your account's just gone. But then you're also on a daily basis subject to, as Jason was talking about, the whims of the owners and the algorithms, which it's important to remember that these third-party apps, particularly later on, once they've sort of consolidated the audience that they have, their goal is not to. There's only like Meta has essentially everyone that's going to own a Meta account has a Meta
Mm.
account.
Hmm.
If you don't, you aren't going to have one, or you're just not interested. And so now their goal is to keep you there as long as possible. And so what may be beneficial for the platform in terms of what they implement in the algorithm may not be beneficial for you as the business, or even beneficial for the users. Their goal is simply to drive up um, ad impressions, or create more ad inventory. And so that may mean new placement types or new features that attract attention and keep people on the platform longer. That may not in the long, may be not disastrous for the long run, but for this month's quarterly earnings, they are goosing our advertising revenue because we have more ad inventory, and in the long term, it will harm the platform. And we've seen that a lot with some of the more staid, established platforms. It's happening in real time with X/Twitter right now. But for sure, Meta has turned off a lot of people with some of its changes as it's uh, shifted its goal to keeping people on platform longer, which TikTok does so well, and they're sort of chasing TikTok's secret sauce.
Well, I think that it's no surprise, although it is surprising when we do meet with brands that may or may not understand this, is that buildup of walled gardens, right? And Google, Meta, all of them are just going to make you a fool if you think that, the hardest thing to do for any Marcom professional is to drive traffic from these platforms anymore, organically and even paid. It is in some situations, and it's worth testing, right? Is testing the on, I'll call it on-prem, but it's on platform or in platform conversion devices, if you will, whether it's instant downloads and forms and things of that nature. And it exists across almost every one of those platforms now, is because the number one goal is to keep you there, which is why one of the biggest signals with like Instagram anymore, you see a lot of these reels and posts that come up. That what's the major prompt? The major prompt is share this with the first person you think of. Well, the reason isn't because Instagram is valuing the like. It's if I share it, that means it expands and it goes to another person, which means this is much more engaged, right? This is just like the butterfly effect all over again. It's just if I share it because I tag you, you're probably going to share it with somebody else, and it just snowballs from there, and it just feeds the algorithm. So you're kind of baked into it. Another thing that I wanted to bring up too was you have vulnerabilities within some of these platforms. There's some more maybe nefarious platforms like your OnlyFans and things of that nature of the world, right? Those are platforms. And quite frankly, they're blocked by some state and government entities that don't believe those things are right. And I'm not here to argue that, but again, outside environmental and economic things impact you and can impact you at a platform level. Because before the whole discussion at a federal level of what we were doing with TikTok in here in the States, that was even happening at the state level. There were certain states that were saying, absolutely not. I mean, if you wanted access to any of that in the state of Utah, like, nope, wasn't happening.
Yeah, I mean, there is so much to consider. Derek and I were just talking about this yesterday. Just like the simplest things to enforce online are not so simple. So like state legislation versus federal legislation versus like GDPR, et cetera, et cetera. Like who like well Derek's point yesterday was like, well, they're just casting this net of uncertainty on the big fish. A lot of places that are really small, this doesn't kind of apply, or it would be like unenforceable at best.
100%.
Because it is so flexible and like what is the burden of proof, et cetera, legally. And I think that those are all very confusing, and that adds to the confusion because when you use a third party app, you're agreeing to terms and conditions that are set by somebody else, somewhere else, for whatever reasons, and usually not in your best interest or your benefit as the user, right? And it looks like you're
Well,
about to say something, Jay.
well, no, I mean, where my mind goes is this is, yeah, so two things. Yeah, when you're the large, when you're the gorilla, when you're the Google of the world, when you have 90%, let's call it search traffic, you know 90% of the market share, you have a massive target on your back, right? You're also easy picking, and you're an easy one to come up in the news because of your size. Meta is the same way. So they are just extremely vulnerable to those types of things from a, administration perspective. Then if you're a brand to kind of get involved in that, you have to really understand that, it becomes more of a pay to play space. I think essentially there. The other side of it too to consider is, you know, it, your brand is tied directly into that app, and you're going to head down to the point where they're not going to want to give you any of that information unless you conduct business there. Amazon is a great example of that. Amazon is a marketplace. And if you're a retailer on there, what you learn is if you get in on the retail side, you can have the physical mailing address of the customers that buy from you all day long, but Amazon will not give you the digital contact information of them, which would allow you to then do email marketing, potentially build audience lists and retargeting and things of that nature, or hell, even follow up and ask them what the satisfaction of the product was. Any digital communication happens through their platform. And I
Right.
think you're going to see that with the rest of the social platforms. The other thing to add to this is, and this has been a huge, I think there are some people in the SEO space that talk about this. I disagree with them. This concept that these platforms owe you the traffic. No, these platforms, like Google doesn't owe you search traffic. Google doesn't owe you SERP presence. That is not their, like, they're not a, they don't have to abide by anything. Neither does Meta, neither does TikTok. They don't have to abide by anything like that. The fact that a piece of content, quote unquote, goes viral is by happenstance. Like they don't owe that to a major brand just because you're a major brand. Just because you're Nike, they don't owe any of that to you. I think brands, especially product marketers and brand marketers, really need to have like a dose of reality here that those platforms do not owe it to you to deliver you with any of that, period.
Right, which is actually a really good segue, and I'm going to start with you here in a second, Derek, into the case for owned media, or what in the heck is owned media? Why is it important to your strategy, based on some of the cues that you just gave us about like, inability to get to that information from third-party apps a lot of the time. And so the volatility of third-party apps, like where they could be here today, gone tomorrow, leads us to this point, and we've had several clients where we've talked about this. Like, I'm not saying it's an either or situation. I really think it's a both situation. But first, I just want to quickly define like what is owned media. I'd like to give a little shout out to Jenny Dietrich that created the PESO model, which has made integrated communications better for everybody because it's simplified sort of like the strategy of these things, and the overlapping areas create better strategic implementation, et cetera. And so the PESO model defines own media, and as one that is uniquely suited, right, to you, your company, your person, whatever it is, yours. You own it, right? You can see my air quotes there on the podcast, but I think that something that we don't talk enough about is um, being able to have a robust email list, for example, which also helps with targeting and PPC, which we'll talk about in a second, I'm sure. Blogs where you can like host your own content, your own website, not using like a third-party app as your landing page for shopping, for example, which we have seen all number of times, unfortunately. And it's gone exactly how we thought usually in those cases. But Derek, will you talk a little bit about like why owned media is critical in this conversation and all and like the benefits or the of owned media generally speaking?
Yeah, for sure. Own media is essentially, it's the benefit is the terms don't change. Whatever created it with, however you started it, you are the one that writes the terms of service for that content. So whether it's your website, whether it's your email marketing, any of those channels that you run the show and dictate the terms and conditions, that there's that safety. Now, granted, they don't potentially have the larger reach that shared or other platforms do, but there is that security and the level of control. And someplace where that might be extra important is a brand that has very particular design standards. Some brands that we've worked with have had problems with how ads are formatted, particularly nowadays that we've moved away from static ads, particularly in the Google landscape, to responsive ads because that format performs better and it's also better suited to display in more places, which creates a larger pool of ad inventory. If you're a brand that has very defined control parameters for your branding, then owned may make more sense for you. You can determine the layout of your email newsletter. You can determine the layout of your website, and essentially, it's up to you to then generate the exposure for your own channels. But you're probably having to do that anyway. That's one of the reasons that organic social media has fallen off as a tactic, is that, I mean, Meta's literal stated goal was that organic reach will go to zero. The goal is we have an audience here and now we're going to monetize it. And that's been the case for many years by this point. But you're going to have to pay for it anyway. And if you're going to have to do that, and you can still use Meta, you can still use YouTube, you can still use these other platforms, it makes increasing sense to invest more in properties that you own where you dictate those terms and conditions. They're not subject to you running afoul of somebody's standards for conduct or accidentally getting deleted. You are in control of all of that. You're your own tech support. And so it makes increasing sense to position your owned properties front and center in your marketing activities. So whether it's and that can take place at a variety of stages. It could be, what is our goal and what is our conversion objective? Well, maybe it's not to increase traffic to our LinkedIn company page. Maybe it's not to increase views on our videos. Maybe it's to increase signups to our newsletter. Maybe it's to get better sorting data or better preference information about our customers so that we can deliver unique insights and help customize that email experience. Um, there's also the benefit that you have when you own the platform, and that's where you are conducting a larger share of your business, that you have better insights into what's going on because you control the platform. You're not subject to the whims of what a particular platform's API is going to allow you to see or allow you to port in. Meta, for example, and we're picking on them a lot because they have such a large place in the market, which they acquired through acquisition, Instagram, WhatsApp, all these other companies that they own. But they used to provide you with a pretty good insights page that let you see a lot of information about your organic activity on your properties. That's no longer the case. Something that these platforms have also done, LinkedIn is also guilty of this, is changed the time window. So you can't go back historically beyond a certain point. I think it's 12 months or something like that. In Meta, it may be as short as 28 days in some cases that you're not able to see certain metrics and certain statistics. So that's another case if you want to understand your performance over time and how you're actually performing. And a lot of businesses are seasonal, so it makes sense to compare to the previous year. Otherwise, up or down may be the result of summer or winter. Um, that's that's an important consideration to take into account.
Well, and to your point too, I think last month, Facebook updated their terms and conditions on, live videos.
Mm.
So any live video that you had created and then stored on Facebook, right, the third party app, now you have a few weeks to basically download all of those to, if you wanted to save or keep them, because now the new updated policy is after 30 days, any live video recorded, stored on Facebook will now just be deleted. And so, much like we saw with TikTok and CapCut and all of these other things that like, people are outraged about when it happens. But honestly, it's kind of a little bit of digital literacy here that's making a huge, fail on the part of the user, me, our friends, our students, whatever, because we just don't understand that that's not our property anymore.
Well, and yeah, and that's a you make a really good point. The last time I think we spoke on this was back in the transition from Universal Analytics UA to GA4. And what you have to understand, like very fundamentally, storing data, like eh, I think it's always interesting. People can go through their day-to-day lives who are not working in this, and quite frankly, if you're not a nerd about it, storing data, the movement of data costs a lot of money. It's energy, right? And so like Google recognizes this, Meta recognizes this, etc. They don't want to store all of that stuff indefinitely. Why is it that if you are an iPhone user or if you're I'm a Pixel user, why is it that I pay for storage now that 10 years ago you never paid for storage, right? Or 5 years ago you might not have ever paid for storage. This is just now being applied at the platform level, where users or potentially brands are not going to be able to, have their content live there indefinitely. It's
Yeah,
just
and
not
like
going to happen.
tech brands are not responsible for like the storage of our data.
Nope.
You know what I mean?
Certainly not going to do it for free.
No, and we don't really understand, I don't think, like what kind of effect that takes. And that's probably something we should discuss at a later time with like,
Yeah.
natural resources and just like what goes into
A hot
technology to
topic.
make technology. It's kind of
Mhm.
it's if you haven't thought about that, which most people I'm guessing haven't, it's significant to our overall global safety, we'll say.
Yeah, but back to the subject of owned media too, and I think this is where this convergence of earned and owned, and especially a lot of brands that want to work with influencers. And it was interesting. I was just at a conference last week, and there was all of a sudden a lot of this discussion around working with, look, nano influencers, micro influencers, like wow, we've come full circle in the last, couple of years. This is interesting. Like we've been talking about this. Okay, but what still nobody is talking about is when you're vetting those influencers out there. I would love to talk to, people that work just with influencers is what are your metrics? What are you looking at? Because again, is that an influencer that all they've done is built their brand and their persona on a platform that they don't own any of the content on? Or what I'm going to be looking at is, do you have a website? Are you a figurehead in the community? Are you a subject matter expert in the industry? Are you, like, do you, if I work with you as a brand, is my content also going to live somewhere else within your realm and your channel that is not on a platform that, quite frankly, I'm already there on, right?
Well,
I'm
Pete,
just using
that's
you for social currency at
right.
that
That
point.
was what, let's say content creators, influencers, whatever you want to call them. But that was like one of the things that kind of surprised me the most in the TikTok takedown, presidential pardon, whatever happened in that time. But I was just amazed at how many like, I subscribe to newsletters usually of the same people that I'm like maybe consuming their content for. And I think it's smart that they have that. But they were just like, going on, oh, I can't believe they're taking this away. And this is my content. And I'm like, you're a fool if you thought that for 1 second any of this was actually yours, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
if you, unless you are recording it and on some kind of another platform, saving it and like keeping those like let's say the original content as like in the video file format or an audio video or an audio format, like that's not yours anymore. Like you just like gave that away essentially. And I think that like what we've had a lot of conversations we've had with clients and things that we reiterate, just generally speaking, is just like how to like make that balance and
Man,
what's
it's
appropriate. And if you're starting from scratch, like let's say you didn't expect for your little business to do so well or something, and so you only put efforts into one thing, and now all of a sudden you're facing a situation where you have to build your brand, not even from scratch because you already had something established, but now we have to go back and do all this like foundational work. Let's talk a little bit about how we create that for clients or what kind of advice we give to clients to get them out of that hole that they've.
Man, it's a tough one, right? It's like a classic case study of don't put your eggs in one basket. Um, just because your audience was on a particular platform or channel last year does not mean that they are going to be there this year, right? Much like, hey, your job as an SEO, for instance, depending on what the SERPs look like, may not be to get it may not be to get my client's site to rank, right? And so the wise SEOs, and I will, this is the only time I'm going to sit here and cheerlead for Black Truck, even though this is our hosted podcast. Um, is that you the best thing that you can do is help people navigate and understand that you don't want all the traffic. This really is visibility, discoverability of your brand when you need to be and where you need to be. And I know that sounds extremely foundational or fundamental to a comms professional. There are many folks in the marketing world that don't understand that like, nope, I'm just going to get traffic from this machine. No, the traffic's going to go away, but oh, ironically, the leads remain good or the revenue remains up. Explain that,
Yeah,
So
the short-sightedness of that all for sure.
yeah, sorry.
Um, yeah, no, that's okay. Derek, can you talk a little bit about developing evergreen content for owned media, like the foundational units of that and what that means for clients or what they could or what clients could potentially focus on if maybe they haven't thought strategically long term, but more short term?
Yeah, it starts with understanding your audience and understanding what is valuable to them and what they need to know, and then creating content to fill that. Sometimes it's text. Sometimes you can write something that will fulfill their needs and answer their questions. Sometimes you may need to illustrate it if it's more complicated with imagery or in a video. And that's essentially the starting place because there's no one size fits all approach. It's when content creation and when owned media is working well, it's because it was done with a deliberate strategy to serve the audience, the core audience, or an audience of prospective customers from the get-go. Great example, we had a client that was sort of a reseller of enterprise software. They were extraordinary in terms of the depth of their knowledge about this platform. Any question you could have about how to set something up, because when you get into these big enterprise platforms, it's incredibly complex. And some people try to implement it themselves without hiring a consultant to do that or a developer to do that. Or they just need to understand that that's part of the process. But essentially, they had a lot of valuable expertise to share that is evergreen, that can be updated and refreshed because the same problems of how do I connect this to my systems? What systems is this compatible with? What kinds of capabilities do I have? What are some interesting case studies or ways that I can use this platform and these features? They had a lot of expertise to share there, and it made for great evergreen content because there are always people looking for that, and they turn to search engines to do that. There's depending on what industry you're in, if you were in maybe local services, or maybe if you were into something that was more consumer and less business, it might make more sense to develop videos because that might be something that helps you show up in search by way of a featured carousel of videos. And maybe your video is what ranks well. But essentially, that's the process. Identify what your audience needs, identify how your expertise can help fill those needs. And everybody, if you're in business doing anything, you have some level of expertise in something. And sometimes also, uh, for particularly for large organizations, it's really a great opportunity to connect with your experts within your organization, your SMEs, your subject matter experts, to find out what they're thinking about, what's on their list of priorities, because that may be a content opportunity you were unaware of. And that may be another way to help flesh out your strategy. Sometimes it's also asking your customers, what don't you know that you would like to know? What can we do for you? You likely have a pool of customers. Maybe you have email marketing, maybe you have personal relationships with some of them that you can reach out and ask, what is it that we could do to provide more value? You can also, check your competitors and see what they're doing. That's another tried and true strategy. But that's the core is, what do our people want? What can we do to fill it? And then go about filling, creating that content. And granted, there's probably an infinite amount of content you could create, but it's about starting from that process of so that you're able to prioritize what's going to be the most value that we create. Yeah, we could answer questions about this topic, but fewer of our customers are interested in that. It's more niche. Maybe that's one that we get to later. Because right now, this is the big topic, and you can see these things. You can use Google Trends. You can look around and on your site and see what people are searching for, how they're finding you, to help prioritize this content if you don't know already. There are plenty of ways to check your insights. And so that's kind of the process. It's like do the research, understand your audience, understand the content, and then get to work.
Yeah, I love the idea of what are the gaps. And in research, we're always thinking about like why are you doing something, right? What gap does it satisfy? Or, what limitation does this specific thing overcome to then amplify or magnify your piece of content or your initial strategy? And, in thinking about that, like we don't think enough about like methods gaps or empirical gaps or theoretical gaps. Instead, we're like only kind of thinking about knowledge-based gaps. And we're often thinking as the brand, not as not as our target audience. And that creates like a lack of, understanding of practical gaps or, we now have like population gaps. We're like missing our entire audience or whatever that we thought we were hitting. And I think that that's a really sound way to think about that. It's, super research heavy, which I love, but not everyone I think is like either knowledgeable or invested in thinking like that because oftentimes they're just thinking as the brand. Like, how do we do this better as the brand instead of how do we become more favorably received, on the end of the target audience? And I think that's really curious about that. Looks like Jason has something he wants to say about that.
I just think that it really ties back into what's the job to be done. And because any product, any service, there's one or there's many jobs to be done. And that's what your audience is looking for, whether it's a consumer, whether it's B2B, we're all humans. And you're looking to fulfill a request. And that request is typically, I need something that can do X. I'm looking to do something that fulfills for Y. And your evergreen content, if invested in it appropriately, can also be chunked up and redistributed. And I mean, you can do a lot of things with it. How much video content we've talked about this recently with a few brands that do. I mean, these are absolutely beautiful, you know, uh, cinema level video shoots that we're using for 15 and 30-second YouTube clips or longer format embedded. But man, really it's the B-roll footage. Like you don't have to go out and invest hundreds of thousands of dollars into a new video shoot all the time. Like I hate to say it, but like the area that we're at in Michigan, like fall colors are fall colors, man. Like it's beautiful.
Every
Um,
fall, looking the
it
same.
it's probably not going to change. Like if you invested in it last year or 2 years ago, we probably can repurpose it. And I think brands that are savvy, cost conscious, that's an area to look, right? You've invested in the content once, repurpose it.
Yeah, and there's all sorts of strategies out there. You and I were just talking about one on LinkedIn the other day about like taking content and
Yeah,
repurposing it into different ways and to satisfy
totally.
different needs. and where that traffic ends up, how it relates to your overall strategy, but it has to have a purpose. And
Hmm.
I think that we see a lot of brands that are trying to just like do cool stuff out there. And, then they're posting that one video that costs quite a lot of money, or that one influencer take that costs kind of a lot to get them to post that or whatever. And like it's never to be seen again. And that's kind of a tragedy. But when you're thinking about like we kind of talked earlier about the third party apps as amplifiers negatively. Now let's look at third party apps as amplifiers more positively, maybe. And like if you have that foundation, like your owned media is in check, let's say you've got everything's coming up rosy, and now we want to use third party apps to help generate traffic back to our owned media. Like what are some of the things that we should be thinking about when engaging audiences on third party apps with reliance on them, but also maybe not totally?
Yeah, are we talking like above and beyond just the link in bio? Hashtag link
Absolutely.
hashtag
Yes.
link in bio.
Yes.
Yeah. I know Derek, you can speak, pretty specifically to this just from a data perspective of I don't want to say what works and what's not, but I think there is a point there engaging the audience on a third party app without relying on them entirely would be lean into the strength of the app. The app might be I'm going to leverage this app to increase my subscribership through instant forms, right? So I leverage the idea and the side of an application that's going to value me keeping my users or my audience on their platform, when in all actuality, my goal is to build my email list so that I can distribute them the content that I want, when I want, where I want, and get them more engaged in the content that I own. That's kind of where my mind goes with it, is I'm going to use the platform for what it's good at, which is amplification. But ultimately, I want to try and own the conversation over here on the other side of the fence.
Yeah, that's entirely it, and that's why it's important to start with a core strategy and step back and don't jump right into tactics, but think broadly and very purposefully about what you want to do. This should also inform your platform selection. Is our audience there? And if they are there, can we extract them? Can we bring them into our own landscape? And if not, then it has to be a pretty good platform that has a pretty great audience or has pretty low paid costs to be there for you to take the time to engage there. Because that's another reality, is that you can't be everywhere and do it well. That's something that's been the case for a long time with social, but beyond. You can't sort of do everything and be everywhere, particularly as a smaller brand. You really have to be choosier about where you are, and so um, you have to go into it you have to like reevaluate. If you're doing it already, reevaluate where you are and make sure that those things line up, that our audience is there. This aligns with what we can and are able to do. So, for example, uh, let's say you get some pressure from inside that we should be on TikTok. Okay, let's have that conversation. Does it align with our strategy? Is our audience there? It's a mostly younger audience. Maybe maybe that's the early, the lower end of your target audience demographics. That's fine. But can we create vertical video content do we have somebody that's skilled as a content creator within TikTok to create the content that matches what the platform is looking for, that's going to be able to be successful for us? And if not, that should exclude it from your list of channels that you're on. And so should, do we have a defined way of bringing people back to our site or sign up for our email in some way that's durable beyond following us? Because that's, ultimately, as we get more sophisticated about this, what we can extract from the platform needs to be of paramount concern, given the way that things have gone and will go. Blue Sky is a great example. New app, grew in the rise of Twitter being acquired and taking a very dark turn, and people are leaving it in droves and going to platforms like Blue Sky. It's sort of that, and I mean Threads is trying, but it's not going to make it. And They don't do sell advertising yet. They will, and their trajectory is one that we've seen now mapped out very well. Once they reach a certain audience size, they will start looking to extract value from that audience, and that'll be selling advertising, selling premium features. Once they get advertisers in there, this is essentially, I mean, if you want to see the roadmap for this, Cory Doctorow, one of my favorite digital thinkers, has mapped this out. He calls it an bleepification and poopification is the process. But this is all very well mapped out, and we know where this is going to go. So, with realizing the very real constraints that we're up against, how does this fit into our strategy, and how can we make this work for us? Should it work for us? Does it work for us? Can we make it?
Okay, Derek, we're gonna start to wrap up here for this segment, but I wanted to have you give a few parting thoughts on owned media, and then I'll jump over to Jay here to talk about reliance on third parties as like a conclusion here. So what is the brass tacks? What do we got to know here?
I mean, the brass tacks are if you don't have owned media, you are in a very tenuous position. So it's something that if you don't, most people have it because of that reason, because enough people have found out some of the challenges or seen the benefits of having owned media, or maybe that's where they started. But having your own media gives you a sort of a stable base from which to operate, and it gives you more freedom to choose when and where you deploy your time and your advertising dollars and your efforts. And it helps insulate you. I mean, I come from an insurance family. It's a form of insurance for you and your brand. It gives you a stable base to operate from, and that's essentially the benefit. And there are still a lot of things you can do. I mean, here it is. It's 2025. People are still heavily reliant on email marketing, which is one of the earliest forms of digital marketing. It has been durable these past few decades. I mean, since listservs, and even listservs are still going on. People still find that form of connection valuable. Podcasts are still valuable, even though they're syndicated now and they're streamed. They're not like purely RSS based audio files that you download onto a digital music player, which is just amazing. But that's a durable format. So there are plenty of these durable formats out there that you can still make use of. People still like when emails have value. People like getting them. We all know this. I mean, we're all jaded marketers, and we all have emails that we enjoy getting every month. I like to see what X and Y brand is doing. I'll take a look every time this brand sends me a update of what's going on, what's new in the catalog. So kind of there it is. Like they have value, and when you're purposeful and deliberate about how you employ them, and you think hard about your audience, they can be very successful.
All right, thanks. And then Jason, dangers of reliance on third-party apps. Where do we stand
Yeah.
on that?
I mean, I think it probably goes along the lines and echoing what Derek was just saying. If you're able to focus more on your own earned media or the owned media. Wow, gosh, you guys have this is complicated. Um,
I like that you're
you're
thinking about PR though. I like
I
that.
I do think that way. You're less susceptible, right? So when you are reliant on these apps as your main or primary function or main or primary means of communication, you are susceptible to their changes. And if you are a brand that is risk averse, it is the only way, editing, auditing your own content on your site, looking at your own digital strategies. These are everything from your website to what your Google business profile says about you to what your different bios do. Anything that you can actually physically edit and audit without the influence of others is really that it's a long-term game, and you really need to focus on it because that's going to leave you're going to be less susceptible to any of these changes within the platform.
All right, gentlemen. Well, Jason, how can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best way to get in touch is obviously, follow Black Truck Media on any social platform, blacktruckmedia.com. I can be found online at Dodge JD on pretty much any platform, including Blue Sky, Threads,
All the
I don't,
things.
all of them. Yes.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time today. And don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, whatever you want to do on all the platforms for us. But you can also find us at blacktrumpmedia.com. It was a pleasure. I'm Adrienne Wallace. Today with me was Derek DeVries and Jason Dodge, also of Black Truck Media and Marketing. Have a nice afternoon, guys.